Hi, everyone. Max Emmer from Emmer Law. I have clinical therapist Brett Sherman, whose practice is in Birmingham. And in addition to being a private therapist, she also has a successful collaborative divorce practice. And what that means for a therapist is she's brought in on cases, oftentimes by me, to assist parents with parenting time issues, custody, and anything else relating to the minor children where her expertise will be utilized and valued. So, Brett, I first wanted to say welcome. And I wanted to say too, since we've worked together and you've worked with other lawyers in the area, how, in your opinion, does a mental health professional like yourself help during the divorce process?
So this is my favorite question. I think, obviously I'm a little bit biased in my response, but I think this is just such an important role for kids, especially in the process. And I have a couple thoughts about how I'll respond to it. I think, first being in a preliminary role when we're thinking about telling kids about a divorce and, how we might share the information or share the news, the initial conversation with kids, right? A mental health professional can be so influential in that way to share how we might communicate and give some guidance on that conversation, tips on language that you might use, maybe role play with parents and provide support both before, and during the process of sharing the information and even more so after, which I'll come back to that thought, but after sharing the news with kids and being a supportive role for both the kids and the family during this kind of whole divorce process. And again, I'll come back to that thought. So I think that's a really important role for a mental health professional, certainly. I think, like you mentioned, Max, in the collaborative divorce process, being the neutral party, which is a different role than mental health professional plays in the clinical practice that I run, but being the neutral party, helping with parenting time and navigating that collaborative process is another role that we can play, which is really influential and helpful. I think helping kind of with the team aspect, and for those who aren't familiar with the collaborative divorce practice, I'll defer to you, Max, as someone who could be really, really helpful for families exploring that option. You can definitely give a lot of guidance there and be really helpful in explaining what that process is like for families. And I guess my biggest and the most important role that I think mental health professionals can play is really for kids in the divorce process, right? So this is the part I think I could go on for probably an hour, but I'll be conscious of our time, and just say for kids, as an objective person, right? As an outlet, as someone who they can vent to, and as a safe and non-judgmental place to gain objective support, right? I know this was such a positive influence and such a positive role in my own parents' divorce when I was younger. And I have felt so fortunate to become this person for so many kids that I see in the private practice space now in my professional role. And I think it's so overwhelmingly helpful and impactful in kids' lives. It's really a wonderful place. So I spoke about in some earlier questions that you asked some behavioral issues. And I think just to touch on them quickly, anxiety, kind of guilt and behavioral issues. Those are three areas I think mental health professional can be really helpful and impactful, of course. And I want to just touch on one of them, anxiety, because such a big part of the divorce process involves new roles, new relationships, new experiences, right? And that's a major place where a mental health professional can be helpful for a kid in talking about these new roles, experiences, and relationships in the family. So I think it's just a really important space for kids to start talking to someone, have an outlet besides their parents to safely speak about these issues, and get the help that they need.
I love that. And I love how how you put it, how you've been able to become what would have been so valuable to you going through this. And, I think we know in 2022 compared to whenever your parents got divorced or any others, so much has changed and evolved. But I think people are finally, one, over the mental health stigma to a degree, and two, realizing that we need more resources than just a fire-breathing lawyer who, frankly, doesn't really care about your kids. And it's not really their job as much. And when we can acknowledge and implement someone whose interests are aligned for divorcing parties and their kids, I think that just makes both the process and the future that much more optimistic.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a really important role too in the collaborative process, right? Being that voice for kids who are not at the table. Yeah, they're not sitting with us when we're negotiating things for a family, but that I get to play that role as someone who's thinking about the kids on an ongoing basis is always at the forefront of my mind. So I love getting to play that role. And kind of going on with that, I had a thought when you asked me to do this with you, and I'd kind of be remiss if I didn't mention it, that there's been a ton of research to your point about where we're at in 2022, right? And it's a really important consideration as we kind of think about all of this as a whole, at where we're at in terms of divorce itself, right? So there's so much information empirically being studied about divorce itself, and parents will often spend so much of their time focusing on the divorce itself and how the divorce itself is damaging their children. That's what parents say to me all the time, like what is happening and how it's going to affect their kids,
them, right?
And how we fight and how it's awful and we should be friendly and all the things. And they're right. It definitely is having effects on their kids. But what studies have found and what the research is coming out with that I think is so important and I want to focus on for one quick second is that the ongoing co-parenting relationship is actually a key determinant of children's well-being in divorced families. And what that means in normal terms, right, is the interaction of parents on an ongoing basis is actually what is mattering so much for kids. So when you and I are talking about this, as friends and colleagues,
right.
I think it's so important for us to kind of make sure families are aware that yes, for certain, parents should be as amicable as they can be throughout the divorce process, but even more so for the years that follow, that they do the best that they can in terms of co-parenting as well as they can, because that is what we are finding is
really
so important for kids.
Interesting. Yeah. And so basically that while it's important to make the process, as streamlined and, amicable as possible, really the follow through and the behaviors after that are even more transformational and are even more kind of observed and inherited, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Our kids are always watching.
Brett, thank you so much. If anyone watching would like to work with Brett or any colleagues would like to bring Brett in on any divorce cases, she can be found at Brett Sherman Counseling in Birmingham, Michigan, or I'm always happy to facilitate an introduction. Brett, thank you so much, and everyone have a terrific day.
Thanks, Max. Talk to you soon.